2 years ago, Bobby Ross's Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets were 3-8 and seemed a long way from a possible national championship. This season, led by sophomore quarterback Sean Jones, Georgia Tech was unbeaten heading into its November matchup with then #1 Virginia. With the defense making the big plays in the second half, the Yellow Jackets ended Virginia's national title hopes with a last-second victory. And with that win, Georgia Tech began its ascension in the polls and dreams of a national championship of its own.
The Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech. 105 teams play Division 1A. Georgia Tech the only unbeaten, and to stay there, they'll have to whip Nebraska, which is wearing all white for the first time since 1966. You are looking live at a sold-out Citrus Bowl in Orlando, Florida on a simply glorious afternoon. Done for Nebraska.
Well, he came after him with that blitz.
Beautiful punt.
They roughed the kicker.
Loose down there, and Georgia Tech has the ball at the 21-yard line. But there is a penalty flag.
Running into the kicker.
Regardless, Georgia Tech is going to have the ball.
They had the choice. Right there, Michael Kroll ran into him right there. That's running into the kicker. You can't do that. Caught his foot, and Michael Kroll is a great football player.
But at the other end, there was a fumble. Turner and Hughes were having a trouble communicating. Here it is. The ball is not handled cleanly, and Jay Martin, number 80, gives the Rambling Wreck a 1st and 10 at the Nebraska 22. These moments come once a lifetime. Enjoy them.
Boy, I'll tell you.
Georgia Tech 45, Nebraska 21. It's now up to the voters. They look like the #1, don't they?
Hi, welcome back to Reach Extended. Whether you're watching this in some fashion or you're on your treadmill and you're listening to the podcast part of it, we're glad that you've joined us. And as you know, we're doing this once a month. It's a collective program that comes to you by way of CEDE Sports and CSRM and all of the foundational partners within the Reach gathering. And we have today one of our foundational partners who is also going to be one of our plenary speakers at the Reach gathering this coming April. We have one of our foundational partners as a plenary speaker every year, and this particular segment today is featuring Jay Martin. So Jay, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. I'm glad to be here. Excited.
And Bob Schindler, you're with us as well, and Bob is one of our foundational partners. And Bob, as always, it's a pleasure to do this with you.
Yeah, Greg, it sure is, and we're excited to have Jay as the completion of our interviewing the various plenary speakers for Reach. And Jay, just to give the audience a little bit of a perspective, tell them what you do as the Director of Camp and Sports Outreach there at Perimeter Church and sort of how long you've been doing that.
Yeah, I've actually been in the same position for over 19 years here at Perimeter. And I'm still shocked that they gave a 30-year-old the position that they gave me. As you can tell, we've grown quite a lot as a church. But my role is I oversee two specific ministries. One is called Camp All-American, which is basically a very simplistic summer day camp. And we have a staff, have a director, Stephen Reddy, who will be at Reach with his team. And then we have a outdoor adventure ministry called Sojourn Adventures, which is, if you know what, ropes course and zip lines and canopy tours and giant swings and all kind of crazy, fun, risky stuff like that. A guy named Brent Curl, who also will be at Reach this year. And so I oversee directionally investing and coaching and really just supporting those two leaders and their team throughout the year.
Thanks, Jay. And why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, and some of your sports background?
Yeah, that's my growing up really is. It's hard to get out of the waters of sports. My father is from Gainesville, Georgia, which it was a little small town when he grew up, just in the North Georgia mountains, and he played football at Georgia Tech, and he was drafted in the NFL, played for George Halas at the Chicago Bears, played with guys like Dick Butkus, Mike Ditka, Gale Sayers, Brian Piccolo, and he played back in the NFL when it was the Wild Wild West. The stories that he has told me are pretty amazing, and I love hearing them. So he's played with some really, really interesting people, to say the least. And so I grew up in that environment with pictures and trophies and stuff all over my basement. So growing up, I didn't know anything else but football. I wasn't that I was made to play football, but it was just kind of part of my DNA. And so I remember my dad was at work, and she took me to my first football practice, and I didn't know how to put the pads in my pants. She didn't know how to put the pads in my pants. We had to stop at a gas station just so a guy, the first kind of man that we could find, could help me put my pads in my pants. So he obviously didn't teach me to do that, which I guess he just assumed, hey, you're my son, you should know how to put football pads in your pants. But I didn't know anything. So I kind of showed you where I started out. In my background was just, I had a great upbringing. Mom and dad were great parents. They loved us. I grew up in an era when Mom said, get out of the house until dinner time. And so I lived in a safe neighborhood, and so we rode our bikes, we ran around, we did everything until we could hear Mom just yell dinner. Literally, she would come out the front door and yell dinner. Me and my brother and sister and our friends would come back, and we'd eat dinner. So yeah, I had a great upbringing, and again, sports were part of my life. That's what we did. We didn't go to games to go watch and become a fan. We were participants. I played football from the time I could put pads on. I played baseball, played basketball, and back in my day, we didn't play soccer because in my family that was a communist sport. Now I know that's different these days, and it's not a communist sport.
Some people still consider it a communist sport, but we'll let the soccer guys argue about that at Reach this year.
It's just funny how here I am in Atlanta, and we pack out Mercedes-Benz Stadium for soccer, and in my family, it was like we're not playing that sport. So it's a great sport, but was not considered great in my family, to say the least. So again, I had a great upbringing. I had a great family. I had again a brother and a sister. I was the oldest, the perfect favorite son, as I always try to convince my dad and mom. But again, as I think about growing up, just had a great upbringing.
And so where did your spiritual journey start for you, Jay, and how did it kind of continue on through your high school and teenage, even college years, if it was a part of that?
Yeah, I grew up going to church. Grew up going to a Baptist church in Dunwoody. It's a great church. I'm sure the gospel was preached, but I didn't hear it. And honestly, I was too cool for school. I thought that kids that liked church and liked youth group and all the stuff that they did was kind of dorky, and just honestly did not appeal to me, primarily because the kids that went there didn't appeal to me. But I think, as I look back on it more deeply, the gospel didn't appeal to me, and Jesus didn't appeal to me, and I wanted to live my own life. But I knew I believed in heaven, I believed in hell, I believed in God, I believed in Jesus, primarily because that was what I grew up hearing about, and I certainly did not want to go to hell. And I certainly would like to go to heaven, even though in my picture of heaven it was that endless worship service, which, to be honest, it was never really attractive, but hell was much more unattractive than that picture, so I certainly would choose heaven over hell. And my understanding of getting that ticket was walking down the aisle of a church, which was very difficult for me. I'm an introvert, was very shy, did not like attention. I liked attention, but not that kind of attention, and was going down, praying a prayer with the pastor and getting baptized. And so at age 12 or 13, I kind of, had some pressure from my granddad, when are you going to join the church? And I remember all these things. It didn't make sense to me, but I was like, I got to get this over with and get on with my life. And so I did. And again, nothing changed in my life as I look back on it. And I just kept living. And there was a couple of people in my life that kind of began to raise awareness that something was not right. One was a youth pastor there that was really the coolest Christian that I ever met. He was crazy, but yet he was a Christian. And that's really all I remember from him, but it was an attractive picture of Christianity that I did not ever have. I think it was an youth intern. And he kind of, I think, lured me in a little bit and turned being a more of attractive kind of place to be, the church, but I really still didn't understand it. And then my mom came to faith. I really think she became born again in my teenage years, and I saw a difference in her life. She would say she became earlier, and she may have, but I saw something different, and she was just somebody that I really looked up to and saw her life change, and so that made a big impact. And then I was recruited by a few schools to play college football. I chose Georgia Tech primarily because it was close to home, and Bill Curry was the head football coach at that time, and he and my dad were friends, and he was just a charismatic leader, and Georgia Tech had a really good football year the year before. Anyway, just some things lined up, and obviously the history of my father going there, and so I went there, and they had a big brother program, so for freshmen to be matched up with older classmen, and I got matched up with Bart. Bart was a senior football player. In most cases, that would be a dangerous thing for a freshman to hook up with an older upperclassman, because usually they're going to show you the clubs and the parties and the frats and all that stuff. Well, Bart happened to be a born-again believer, I found out. And he had just come out, had a very similar background than me, come out of the kind of a growing up a little bit in the church, was from Columbus, Georgia, had a wild past in terms of his years at Tech, but had recently met Christ and changed drastically. And just literally being around him for about 3 or 4 weeks, he was really the first Christian that I met that I go, wow, something's different. And I am intrigued, and I'm interested, and I want to know more. And so it was really Bart's influence, and God's obviously influence in Bart's life, that drew me to Christ. And so my freshman year, at some point in time, I really saw that my life, I was playing games, and Bart had what I wanted. And he really shared with me through the scriptures of how to know Christ. And so that's what happened.
Wow. That's quite a story. Does Bart, by the way, know the influence he had on you, Jay?
Yeah, Bart does. We see each other periodically, not as often as I'd like. He's still in full-time ministry, and
oh wow,
yeah. He was going to be in banking, and then God called him out of banking, and he has been sharing the gospel with students on campuses for ever since 1987 or 1988.
So then I know you played for a national championship with Georgia Tech. You graduated. You coached for a little bit, if I understand right. And then that's when, after that, you went to work for Perimeter. Is that the timeline, sort of? Do I have that correct?
Close, yeah. I finished playing football at Tech in 1990. We won the national championship. I shared it with Colorado, actually, because many people, as I say that, go, well, you shared it with Colorado. Yes, we did. But they had a loss and a fifth down year, so we were actually the only undefeated team that year that won the national championship. But we did share it. It was a great thrill. It was actually a very big surprise, so I'm very grateful to have been part of a team like that. So I really honestly didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I stayed and coached for a couple years, thought I might want to do that because football is really all I ever knew, and realized very quickly that I did not want to do that. I actually got my graduate degree, and through that was going to go out and make a lot of money and that type of stuff. And through my last quarter, 6 weeks before I was graduating, as I said, I was a believer. Probably 4 years prior to that, really God began to work on my heart and my character and began to reveal some really deep sin issues I had in my life. And I actually had to drop out of graduate school to really get some really intense help in some areas of my life. Just brokenness, just complete, utter brokenness that I had hidden from myself and from everyone else around me. Unfortunately was married, and so my wife had to suffer through that. And just God began to tear me down in a way that I never expected him to tear me down and to rebuild me. And I ended up going back and finishing my graduate degree, but in the process, I needed a job. I had a new wife and didn't have any way of supporting her, so began to look, and through just a process, began to look at Dunwoody Baptist, which is where I grew up. My mom worked there in the Wellness Center, and a guy named Wes Yeary interviewed me to help him with a sports program. And honestly, when I was growing up, and even when my first interview, I always say this, I never even liked the smell of the church. The church was never a place I wanted to work. It was not a place I enjoyed. It was not a place that really had any sense of attraction to me. And so I walked in and interviewed, and I'm like, this still smells like it always smelled. I don't want any part of this. And after about 1 week of sitting around going, I don't know what to do, I got to find a job, I called Wes back and said, hey, is that job still available? He said, yes, come on. And that started my love affair with ministry. It was a long journey, but after about 3 weeks of being there with Wes's mentoring and just kind of just caring for me through that part of my life, I was like, this is really cool. I really love this. It wasn't a call at that time. It wasn't anything super spiritual in my mind. It was just a job. But man, I felt like kind of like the guy in Chariots of Fire. I began to kind of have a sense that, wow, this is a fit. I feel God's pleasure in a way that I cannot articulate when I'm here, in a way that I never thought that I could. So yeah, that's a little bit of my story.
Hey Jay, it's been great hearing all of this from you, and let's transition a little bit to even the Reach gathering itself, and you're a foundational partner now. Why did you choose to become a foundational partner?
Control, Greg. Control.
I mean, you were involved in some of the summits. You hosted them at your church. But I know you've got some real significant thoughts about what's going on in our movement and how we need to approach things. And I'm just really pleased that you've chosen to get involved with Reach, because you've got so much to offer to it. And I love the way you think, but you tell us, what is it? What is it about Reach?
Yeah, this, unfortunately, I've become too opinionated in my older age. And as the CSRM Summit was the first conference that I ever went to. It was in Dallas. I think it was at Jim Riley's church, the first one that ever.
Well, that explains a lot right there.
And over the years they were such a blessing because I learned so much, and most of all, I met some great people there that really just taught me what sports ministry is, and And as God was moving and working in my own heart, there was something that happened in me, and it was a process. I don't know all the contributing factors, but I really just began to see that, conferences are great and they have a great purpose. But there was a time in my ministry when I just began to see that for me, conferences really didn't serve the purpose that I wanted them to serve. And it was time to kind of pull out and begin to invest in some different things. And I think primarily because I began to see that conferences seemed to be more practical. Great speakers, great relationships, but I began to see, at least in my ministry, I needed something and somebody's to help me with the gospel drift, which is drifting away from really the primary thing and person who's changed and transformed my life and continues to transform my life. My desperate need for him, and then how do I communicate that and live that out with my team and with our ministry and with our programs. And I just didn't see anything out there doing that. And so when Bob kind of shared with me the vision of Reach, and I said, well, that's great, I've heard that before, but let me really kind of walk cautiously because my time is limited. I had very little margin. I did not want to get pulled into something that I was going to have to pull levers and do a bunch of stuff that really wasn't going to help me and others in that area. And over time, just spending time with you and Bob and the other foundational partners, not only did I hear the heart of the ministry or Reach, but I really saw a true, honest commitment to make sure that we keep the gospel center in everything that we're doing. And did we do that perfectly? No, but that's really what drew me in, and it continues to keep me. And I get drawn in deeper and deeper every year.
And Bob, that's probably a good segue even into some other things, into the whole Reach concept, because we approach Reach from a different perspective. It's not a convention, it's not a conference, it's a gathering, and that entails certain things. And our plenary speakers come from within us rather than coming from outside of us to us. They're part of us, and they're people who are leading these ministries. And all of the tracks, people don't get paid to do these seminars. They come to give. And Bob, you and Jay are even leading one of the tracks on gospel centricity. Besides Jay's plenary address, you guys are doing a whole track on gospel centricity around sports, rec, and fitness. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, Greg, thanks for giving us that opportunity to talk about that. It really flows out of what we say Reach is about, which is trying to catalyze and further unite this movement of reproducing gospel-centered sports, rec, and fitness ministers in local churches. And so we feel like it's really important to always have, or at least for the last 3 years and now this 4th year, to try to keep the main thing by having a gospel centricity track where we talk about what gospel centricity is. Jay and I do that keynote together, and then we have several other tracks surrounding that where we'll talk about how to develop a gospel-centered culture that Jay's going to be leading. Jay, you want to say a couple things about that particular track session that would help people to understand what you're thinking there?
Sure. Culture is so critical. You can write things down on a piece of paper, a vision and mission, and you can go do programs, but in reality, if the people that you are working with aren't bathed in this constant the air that we breathe has to be what propels us to do ministry. And so as a leader, I've learned a lot of things of what not to do, and I've learned a lot of things to do to make sure that we are doing everything we can to stay consistent and helping the gospel be center in what we do, not just insert it into what we do, but be really center in what we do. And it's a challenge to stay relevant and attractive. And it really is a primary thing that me as a leader and all the leaders in my ministry, we constantly have to work at. So we're going to share just what that looks like for us, not for you and for whoever else is there, but for us. And hopefully we can, some folks can learn something from that.
Yeah, and then we'll also do, thanks Jay, we'll also do a track on, that's a panel of other sports ministers and sports rec and fitness ministers from around the country, addressing just how do you get gospel-centered and how do you stay there, just some of the challenges that they faced in that. We'll have Jeff Fox and Ken Cross leading a track session on integrations versus injection, and what does it look like to integrate the gospel into everything you're doing, some ideas around that. So those are some of the track sessions that we'll do in the gospel centricity track per se. But Jay, why don't you also just give us a couple thoughts on what you're thinking with regard to your plenary session?
And Jay, as you well know, as a foundational partner, encouragement, inspiration are two of those 4 words that we talk about at Reach, and the plenary speakers hit particularly those 2. They may also hit the connections and the equipping and all that, but these 2 are really from the plenary speaker, and boy, from what I can just hear in your heart, anybody that's watching this or listening to this particular podcast and you're not decided about coming to Reach, I hope that what you just heard from Jay encourages you to just punch on there on the website and get registered and come. You just do not want to miss Jay Martin. I mean, that's just all there is to it.
I totally agree, Greg.
Thanks, guys.
Well, Bob, any last things here?
Yeah, Jay, again, thank you for being a foundational partner, being a part of the movement. Thanks for your willingness to share your heart coming this coming April. And we're excited to have you and your staff, and we hope those of you that are out there that are thinking about coming will really prayerfully pursue God's heart on your attendance. We trust He's willing to communicate that to you one way or another. We are excited about the new people that have already signed up, and thrilled that God seems to be affirming our heart's desire to see people brought together, united, and further catalyzed in this movement. So we hope you'll join us. Jay, any parting words from your heart?
No, come. Take it for someone who every year it's a discipline, and I say this very often, but it's a discipline for me to stop work, to get out of my mode and go to something like this. But every year it is a delight. My heart is encouraged. I'm nourished. I get to spend time with people like Greg and Bob and others, especially newcomers. I love seeing newcomers and seeing what God's doing in this gospel movement. I just love learning from people. I mean, there's faces that are coming to mind. I can't even remember names of people that I just go, oh my gosh, you've got to share that. We've got to get you in front of people because it's not us that have everything to say. It's you. It's people that haven't come. You have things to say. And we have opportunities for you to say it, and you need to say it. We need to be encouraged by you. So please, some of you may love to come things like this, and great, you need to come because we need you to energize us. But some of you just need to just make the decision and just do it. And I promise you, Greg will give you your money back if it's not worth you coming. Since he loves Ohio State, they have a lot of money. So please come.
Well, thanks, Jay, and thanks, Bob. Let's just encapsulate this. We're at Ridgecrest in North Carolina, the last week of April, Tuesday to Thursday, the 24th through the 26th. And we've got these plenary speakers. If you want to hear from the other ones, they are online. And we've got those recordings of Susan Stewart, a former Olympian, who's a sports minister at her church in Toronto, Canada, and also Chris Phillips, who was a longtime sports minister, rec minister at his church, and now planting a church using sports and rec and fitness. And then we've got all these different tracks that are there. We've got all of the different tracks that you're going to find some. Youth sports, adult sports, fitness ministries, planting churches using sport. All of these things. There's going to be theological, philosophical, but most of all methodological stuff. And the two guys that you've heard on this with Jay and Bob, they've got a great track for you. So we really encourage you to come. And guys, before we go, I just feel led right now. I think there's somebody out there that's just listening or watching this and is debating this. And I'm going to encourage you even to bring your entire staff, even if they're all volunteers. Because when I've done this, when I sat there as a sports minister at a local church, and I brought different people from my church every single year, and you know what ended up happening? Not only did our sports and rec fitness ministry get better, but many of those ended up catching the fever. And they're now sports ministers at another church. They've gone into this vocationally. I just think that you can't undersell here what could happen if you do come, like Jay had just said. So Jay and Bob, thanks so much for making the time and for your partnership. You just don't want to miss the Reach Gathering this coming April 2018. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, guys. Glad to do it.